So, after a year in New York, I went to St. John's College, the 100 Great Book School, and got a very liberal education and was supposed to have read through all of those books. Perhaps I read through a quarter of them. At any rate, it was a very solid liberal education in the Western tradition. And my dog was with me all those 4 years, Duke. And after that, and in my last year there, I I had been the head of the film society, film club, which was very popular there. And every Friday night, or was it Saturday night, I can't remember now. At any rate, it was de rigueur for attendance, and I would choose films, French films and German films and Italian films and the like, and we'd show them. And I suppose I became the head of the King William Players, which was the theater group at the college, though I didn't really do anything other than kind of hold meetings and let other people do things. In the last year, I did do a play, Thomas Cranmer of Canterbury, and it indeed was the first American performance of this play. It was the play that followed Murder in the Cathedral in England, and I just happened on it by some mistake, and it was absolutely suited for St. John's audience, and I was very fortunate to have in a number of the chief roles terrific students and one faculty member, and there were no women at the college at this point, but these were wives of, and it attracted a lot of attention, and I think my luster at the college came as a result of this. And indeed, 50 years later, there was a special edition of the college magazine devoted entirely to that, with a picture of somebody who was supposed to be me, but it wasn't. So much for history. At any rate, as a result of this, let's see, it was Nicholas Nabokov, who had been a tutor at the college but was no longer, came back and saw the production, and he was mightily impressed, and I had somehow cannily managed to get his son, who was resident in Annapolis, into the play, so that Nicholas was obligated somehow to come and see it. But he was impressed, and as indeed was the dean of the college. Between them, they conspired to get Nicholas to get me somehow an assistantship with an important French director in Paris, whose name escapes me at the moment. It'll come back. So, about a week after I graduated from college, the St. John's College, I was on my way to France by sea. I should, while we're at sea, point out there is some background to all of this. When I was in high school, we organized an amateur theater company that was called the Astrians. And that name Astrians comes, thus we shall arise to the immortal stars or something. Sicitur ad astra, Astrians. And we staged some plays which were, believe it or not, when I was 16 or 17, performed at several USOs in Brooklyn. These were hospitality centers for servicemen during the war who were stationed in the New York area and in Brooklyn. And one that I do remember our doing was Lillian Hellman's Watch on the Rhine. And we did it without any permission or paying any whatever to Madame Hellman. And we performed it at several USOs, and I directed it and indeed played one of the leads. And it was largely appreciated by these servicemen who every once in a while would interrupt us while we were playing. I remember once when I pulled out a gun as part of the action, some wag in the audience said, "Bang!" But that's nice audience participation, and I treasure it. And then I should say, too, that when I left high school, and before I was drafted, I spent one term at Brooklyn College, a very good liberal arts college, which indeed was free at that point, which all colleges should be. And I was in a production of my first Shakespeare play, and The Taming of the Shrew, and I played Lucentio, which is an important secondary role. And that was directed by a very accomplished faculty member director. And it was the first time I was in really professional costumes, and the first time I saw and learned how to put on really professional makeup. It was a very high quality show, and it was a very important moment in my development into the theater. It was close to professional, and that was where I was when I went into the Army Air Forces. That's the background for all of this. Meanwhile, I crossed the Atlantic and got to Paris, only to find out that the great director-actor that I was supposed to somehow apprentice with had died. So that I never got that to be fulfilled. But I was in Paris, and I was in France, and the next few years, that's where I spent much of my life, either in France or in London or Stratford, and a little bit moment in Italy when I can't even remember in what circumstances I was in some crowd scenes in some movies. But while in France, I studied What did I study? Well, aside from French, which I never really fully mastered. I got around, but never fully mastered. I was employed, you might say, by the British Council, which is the British cultural outreach all over the world. And I became the director of their theater outfit. I was acceptable because I was clearly a colonial from America. And the company was made up of college students in Paris at the time. And part of the time, I lived at the Cité Universitaire, where a lot of them were in residence, and we performed plays that toured the lycée and colleges in and around the Paris area. And one of those, we did a Julius Caesar, and it was quite ambitious. Looking back, I wonder why I made some of the choices in costumes that I did, but I did. But it is recorded, and somewhere I have the tape of it, because it was the first full English Shakespeare performed on Radiodiffusion Française, so that I have recording of it done by them, and I should get it transferred somehow, but I don't understand these technicalities. But I will.
Yes, get it.
I will consult
Yes.
with my present director about that,
Get that done, yes.
because I'd be very curious to see what we were doing at that point. Well, we did a half dozen productions, and another one was She Stoops to Conquer, and I can't remember the others. At any rate, the British Council didn't have much money because Britain was broke at the time, of course, after the war. And what they did was to give me a half an apartment that the British owned in very close to the Arc de Triomphe. So I had this very nice apartment that I shared with, I forget his name, and it'll come back to me too, who was a British diplomat in cultural affairs, and who'd grown up in India, so it was very interesting talking to him. He was very much part of the then dissolving empire, and his brother was the editor of the All India Times, which very important English language newspaper in India. So that was a wonderful experience. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, yes, I did study, though I never mastered, various kinds of theater physical work. And it has colored my own work. Though I didn't master it, it gave me insights. I studied with Barrot's colleague and teacher and director, And what else? I can't remember now, but that'll do. And one of the things, one of those turns in my life that I look back on and say quite often, what if, is that the Beaux-Arts of the French government had arranged for me to become an assistant to, and again, I'm blocking names today, it's a bad day, oh dear me. Well, somebody who had been a very important designer and director in the earlier part of the 20th century, and he was in retirement now, and he needed somebody to help him with his papers and books and the like. He was, incidentally, Ellen Terry's son.
Oh.
So it was right down the great
Wow.
line of
Yeah.
British
Wow.
theater. And the Beaux-Arts would pay me a stipend to go to the south of France, where he was retired. He was an old man and needed help with his papers and books and the like. Not a good choice. I'm not that sort of person who could really help with papers and books. I can't even manage my own. At any rate, it was a wonderful offer. And so I had the summer off, and a good friend of mine, Diana de Beaumoulay, English, but who had married into a French family, had suggested that I drive her and her children and mother to the south of France. It would have fit in perfectly. But she couldn't offer me any money for it, so I'd have to, although I'd be driving their car and they'd pay for the gas and the like, I'd have to somehow find hostels and that sort of thing. At the same time, I hadn't seen my own family for 2 or 3 years, and at that point, I elected to go back to the United States to see my family. That became a kind of pattern in my life, where the pull of family, however destructive in many ways to me, and to my career.
What year was that?
I'm sorry?
What year did you go back?
Oh, what year was that? That was 1953, I think,
You went back.
that I came back to the States. And I'm talking about the pattern where I had something in my career that was interesting and that I felt attracted to, and the pull of family, more often than not, interrupted that or negated that. A good deal of the story of my 47-year marriage to Rochelle had some of that quality in it. So I went back to America and never did do what the Beaux-Arts had set up for me. And I keep looking back at that every once in a while in a what if. Meanwhile, many good things have happened to me amongst them. My life since, my children, etc., and whatever career I have managed to develop. So I came back to America, and in New York, through a St. John's connection, actually. I met Julian Beck and Judith Molina early in their career with Living Theatre, and they were very receptive. And I became a colleague of theirs, more than a colleague. I mean, it became a very close relationship for 2 years. Just before they had their big breakthrough, I left them for a number of reasons. The number, some of them personal, because we were getting much too intimate, the three of us. And we also politically were not lined up, and their theater was very political. And as left-leaning as I was not in their particular camp. Also, they were beginning to get into their phase, finally, of audience participation, but in a kind of participation that I did not espouse. But I spent 2 years with them, and the next important step, wait, someplace in there, I'm trying to fit it in, I can't remember. I was included in a very, 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 very minor position in Orson Welles' production of King Lear, which was then rehearsed in New York and performed. And although I don't think I had a line in it, I was certainly in the cast. And it was wonderful to watch Orson, who was a genius, undoubtedly a theatrical genius, wreck the whole thing. Along the way, while we were in rehearsal, he said he had broken his ankle. We never believed him, but he arrived in a wheelchair, in an ambulance all the time, and had to come in through the lobby because the stage door had several steps in it. And it was I who became the captain of his wheelchair brigade. And I was always with Orson all the way through the play. And I may have had an "Aye, sir," or something like that, sir, but I can't recall. That was my first Broadway appearance, and but he was clearly a genius. There's no question about it, but an absolute infant in his own life. We would break for lunch, and he would go off for lunch, and we were supposed to be back in an hour and a half, and he would come back 3 hours later, and it was not good for the morale or that sort of thing. He was very self-indulgent, and easily blamed anybody else for anything that went wrong, which was the pattern of his whole career, but I saw it very close up. And I'm trying to remember what else happened that year. Well, there was the Living Theater, and then, I think it was just about then, I had an interview with Sanford Meisner at the Neighborhood Playhouse, which was, at that point was the best acting school in the country. Sandy was a wonderful acting teacher, a son of a bitch, but a wonderful acting teacher. And I had an interview with him, and I became one of his assistants, and I was there for, it must have been at least 3 years. And this was an important 3 years for me, because my background had, in training and experience, didn't have a lot of the Stanislavski method at all. I didn't really fully understand or know what it's about, whereas Sandy was a great exponent of that, along with Stella Adler, to the very mature Stanislavski method, as opposed to the earlier work that Stanislavski had done, that Strasberg had taken up. So there was I was in the opposite camp from Strasberg, and Sandy would not permit us to go to Strasberg's actor studio meetings, lest we be contaminated. Though I did sneak into Strasberg a few times, never told Sandy or anybody else about it. And in Strasberg, you got the earlier emotion-based theory, out of which Stanislavski grew to his action-based theory. But in Strasberg, you got the high rabbi psychologist version. And it was interesting to see. I'm skipping something. I'm skipping that I went to Columbia graduate school, to the theater graduate school, to take my Master of Fine Arts. And I was there, I guess for 2 years. This, somehow I squeezed it into all of these other undertakings. And there were some good teachers there, but it was not a well-organized school. I did appear in several productions there, and they were good and frequently very solid. And I felt I had come into my own somehow as an actor during that period there in those productions at Columbia. And the head of the program there was Milton Smith, who represented the old school of theater very much. But he did bring in people who did have other opinions. to teach courses and the like. And I somehow managed to squeeze that in. I don't know how. And I guess that was the end of that period. Except that, no, there were several other things going on. I was in the company, I think the second year, of the Williamstown company, which has become quite important, and it was becoming important then too. And I played leads there, comedy leads, seemed to be my specialty. Nikos Saparopoulos was the head of the company at that point, and we had an on and off relationship. I was not asked back, but it was a good year for me, very good year. I got good reviews, especially in my comedy leads, and then I think the next year I went to the San Diego Shakespeare Festival, where in Midsummer Night's Dream, I played one of the leads, and I'm blocking terribly today. It's terrible. I can't remember the name of the lead I played, but
We can say it later.
I can say it later. It'll come back to me.
Yeah.
So,
What year are we at now? Do you know? Beyond 58, 59?
oh, not that late, no.
Okay.
Not that late, no. Because by then, when I was at San Diego, Rochelle and I got married. And we were living on West 58th Street, right behind the big hotel there on the corner. And they were tearing down this wonderful brownstone. We lived on the top floor of the brownstone. And we stayed until they finally cut off our water and our electricity and our gas. But one of the nice things, and Rochelle was pregnant by this time, which was one of the reasons we got married at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Very frequently a reason for getting married, in case you hadn't noticed. And one of the nice things about living there, in the basement of this wonderful brownstone, which had been the kitchen floor, there was a French patisserie. And on Saturday night when they closed, they would leave at the doors of the occupants of the house what was left over. So we always had these marvelous French patisserie. That was one of the worst things about having to move out of that house. It was a great block. It was just like, it became, I think, the back entrance to the Park Lane. It was diagonally across from the Paris movie theater. And it was a block famous for high-class courtesans to live on. Very high class, nice women, very nice women with good professional credentials who would be out walking their expensive dogs in their expensive clothes, and you'd meet them and they were wonderfully friendly and we'd greet each other, and it was a very nice sense of life in New York. We were married actually in in L.A. in my Uncle Barney's garden. I asked if we could have our marriage ceremony there. He had a lovely big garden and a lovely big house, and he'd done very well. And typical of Barney, we arrived to find that he had assembled some 60 or 70 guests for our wedding, some of whom we knew and some of whom we were vaguely connected to, a lot of whom we had no idea about. But this was Barney's way of fulfilling his social obligations, which was probably one of the reasons he was so successful and became a millionaire. I don't know. At any rate, we were married in the garden there. And I had, back in New York, I had found us an apartment on Waverly Place, at 123 Waverly Place, which was a half block from the Washington Square. It was very nice. It was right in the heart of the village. And we had a 4-room apartment there. And our first 2 boys were born there. And then we moved over to a very large apartment at 119, which was close to the square, still on the same block, about 3 or 4 doors over. Again, a brownstone this time. This last time, 123, was an apartment building. What had happened was that we took the ground floor. I remember walking into it and the sense that it went on forever. And I later found out that it was the deepest brownstone in Manhattan. And this floor had been a fraternity. And they, having wrecked it and having been chased out, the apartment was being restored when I walked in. And they were happy to have somebody make a claim at it that I hit it at just the right moment. And it also came with the basement, which originally had been designed as the kitchen floor, but it wasn't, because in the midst of being this brownstone being built, the notion of flats, an apartment on one floor, became popular in Manhattan. So they turned the brownstone they were building into 1-floor apartments. And in the ground floor apartment, which we had, we also got the basement. So I had, in short, a studio in the basement, an acting studio. It was very convenient. And there were 2 rooms in the back, which became the rooms of Rochelle's daughter from an earlier marriage, for both the daughters. And that was convenient too. And let's see, where was I? And by this point, I was teaching at the neighborhood playhouse, assisting Sandy in teaching. And we're now, I'm trying to remember the dates, but we're now in the late 50s. And then the next important thing along this career was that I became the artistic director of an opera company, the North Shore Friends of Opera, which happened in Queens, in the far reaches of Queens, right next to Nassau, of which the connection being my sister-in-law, Ruth, was a member of the board, and they were looking for a stage director, and I went as stage director. And they were not happy with their artistic director, so I replaced him. He was a musician, and I wasn't. This is rare that you get an artistic director of an opera company. As a company, it wasn't a company really at all. What we did was to put on productions, and they were very high quality productions. We performed them at Queens College in a very large auditorium and sold out several performances. And the conductors were frequently very good conductors who wanted to sharpen themselves in opera conducting. And these were well-known young conductors, quite accomplished. And then the orchestra contract that we had was the contractor for the old Toscanini NBC orchestra. So of the 35 or 40 orchestra members we had, many of them had worked for Toscanini.
Wow.
And they produced a marvelous sound. It was wonderful. Very, very high quality stuff. And we had a pick of all those young opera singers in New York who wanted to get new roles under their belt and wanted to be seen. So the quality was very high. And then I was very fortunate to have some very inventive designers, stage designers. And that's been true of a lot of my career. I've been very dependent upon good stage designers, interesting stage designers. I've been responsive to them. They've turned me on. And that was certainly the case there. And we got remarkably good reviews in the Herald Tribune, which was a very important newspaper at that point, and in the Times. And I was there for 5 years, and our productions kept getting more and more sophisticated, and our audiences were very pleased, and our board was pleased, but our board scurried around trying to find board members who could supply money, and indeed they thought they found them with some millionaires who turned out not to put any money in it at all. And so that after 5 years we went bankrupt. And that was the end of my career in opera directing there. I did more opera directing later on in my career. I enjoyed opera conducting, and what I learned was the important thing in directing opera is that that you don't follow. What you really follow is the music. You get what you're doing from the music and not from the libretto. I mean, you have to know what libretto is about, et cetera, but really to find out how to direct opera, you've got to listen to the music. And I'm not a musician, but thank God I have a good ear, and I can hear patterns. I hear patterns, and those patterns told me what to be doing on the stage. So much for that. I think we can stop now.